I returned from the city on that May afternoon in 1914, pretty well disgusted with life. I'd been 3 months in England and was fed up with it. I couldn't get enough exercise, and the amusements of London seemed as flat as soda water that has been left standing in the sun. Richard Hannay, I kept telling myself. You have got yourself into the wrong ditch, my friend, and you had better climb out. Made me bite my lips to think of the plans I had been building up those last years in South Africa. I'd made a fortune as a mining engineer, and I had figured out all kinds of ways of enjoying myself. My father had brought me out of Scotland as a young man, and I had never been home since. So England was a sort of Arabian Nights to me. And I counted on stopping there for the rest of my days. But from the first, I was disappointed with it. In about a week, I was tired of seeing sights, and in less than a month, I had had enough of restaurants, theatres, and race meetings. Here I was, solidly middle-aged, with enough money to have a good time, yawning my head off all day. On my way home, I turned into my club, had a long drink, and read the evening papers. There was an article about Karolidis, the Greek premier. I rather liked the chap. He seemed honest, at least, but I gathered that they hated him pretty deeply in Berlin and Vienna. One paper said that he was the only barrier between Europe and Armageddon. The night was fine and clear as I walked back to my flat in Portland Place. I was just fitting my key into the door when I noticed a man at my elbow. I'd not seen him approach, and the sudden appearance made me start. He was a slim man with a short brown beard and small, piercing blue eyes. I recognized him as the occupant of a flat on the top floor. "Can I speak to you?" he said. "May I come in for a minute?" He was steadying his voice with an effort, and his hand was pawing at my arm. I got my door open and motioned him in. He fastened the chain with his own hand. "I'm very sorry," he said humbly. "It's a mighty liberty, but you look the kind of man who would understand. Say, will you do me a good turn?" "I'll listen to you," I said. "That's all I'll promise." I was getting worried by the antics of this nervous little chap. There was a drinks tray on a table beside him, from which he filled himself a stiff whiskey. He drank it off in 3 gulps and cracked the glass as he set it down. "Pardon," he said, "I'm a bit rattled tonight. You see, I happen at this moment to be dead." I sat down in an armchair and lit my pipe. "What does it feel like?" I asked. I was pretty certain that I had to deal with a madman. A smile flickered over his drawn face. "Oh, I'm not mad. Yet. Say, sir, I've been watching you, and I reckon you're an honest man and not afraid of playing a bold hand. I need help worse than any man ever needed it, and I want to know if I can count you in." "Get on with your yarn," I said, "and I'll tell you." He seemed to brace himself for a great effort, and then started on the most bizarre rigmarole I had ever heard. Here's the gist of it. He was an American from Kentucky, involved in politics, and I took him for a sharp, restless fellow who always wanted to get down to the roots of things, and who had gotten a little further down than he wanted. Behind all the governments in Europe, there was a big subterranean movement going on, engineered by very dangerous people. He'd come on it by accident. It fascinated him. He went further, and then he got caught. I gathered that most of the people in it were the sort of educated anarchists that make revolutions, but that beside them, there were financiers who were playing for money. The aim of the whole conspiracy was to get Russia and Germany at loggerheads. He had another drink, and I mixed it for him myself, for I was getting interested in the beggar. So I said, "Why are you dead?" He smiled. "I'm coming to that, but I've got to put you in wise about a lot of things first. If you read your newspapers, I guess you know the name of Constantine Karolidis." I sat up at that, for I had been reading about him that very afternoon. "He is the man that has wrecked all their games. He is the one big brain in the whole show, and he happens also to be an honest man. On the 15th day of June, he is coming to this city. The British Foreign Office has taken to having international tea parties, and the biggest of them is due on that date."
Karolides will be murdered then, and there will be nothing between us and Armageddon. But it's not gonna come off if there's a certain man who knows the wheels of the business alive right here in London on the 15th of June, and that man is gonna be your servant, Franklin P. Scudder.
He sat, blinking like an owl, fluttering with nerves, and yet desperately determined. By this time, I was pretty well convinced that he was telling the truth. It was the wildest sort of narrative, but I had heard in my time many steep tales which turned out to be true, and I had made a practice of judging the man rather than the story. Once I'd discovered this plot, said Scudder, I realized that there was only one way to put my pursuers to sleep. I had to die. I told the man that valets me that I was feeling pretty bad and got myself up to look like death. Then I got a corpse, you can always get a body in London, and made it up to look like me. The jaw was the weak point in the likeness, so I blew it away with a revolver. I watched from my window till I saw you come home, and then I slipped down the stair to meet you. And now, all I need is to stay dead until the 15th of June. I thought for an instant or two. Right. I'll trust you for the night. Just one word, Mr. Scudder. I believe you're an honest man, but if you're not, I should warn you that I'm a handy man with a gun. I made him up a bed in my smoking room and sought my own couch, more cheerful than I had been for the past month. Things did happen occasionally, even in this God-forgotten metropolis. They found Scudder's corpse the following day. It caused a huge commotion in the building. Suicide, they reckoned. This cheered Scudder up no end, and the first 2 days he stayed with me in that back room, he was very peaceful. He read and smoked a bit, made a heap of jottings in a black notebook, and every night we had a game of chess, at which he beat me hollow. But on the third day I could see he was beginning to get restless. Say, Hannay, he said, I judge I should let you a bit deeper into this business. I should hate to go out without leaving somebody else to put up a fight. And he began to tell me in detail what I had only just heard vaguely. I did not give him very much close attention. The fact is, I was more interested in his own adventures than in his high politics. I remember that he was very clear that the danger to Karolides would not begin till he had got to London, and would come from the very highest quarters, where there would be no thought of suspicion. The name Julia Chechenyi seemed important, though I had no real idea how that fitted in. He talked, too, about an organization called the Black Stone, and he described very particularly somebody that he never referred to without a shudder. An old man with a young voice who could hood his eyes like a hawk. The next day I went out to dinner and came back about 10:30. I had a cigar in my mouth, I remember, as I pushed open the smoking room door. The lights were not lit, which struck me as odd. I wondered if Scudder had turned in already. I snapped the switch, but there was nobody there. Then I saw something in the far corner which made me drop my cigar and fall into a cold sweat. My guest was lying sprawled on his back. There was a long knife through his heart, which skewered him to the floor. I sat down in an armchair and felt very sick. Scudder's poor, staring white face on the floor was more than I could bear, and I managed to get a tablecloth and cover it. Then I staggered to the cupboard, found the brandy, and swallowed several mouthfuls. I was in the soup. That was pretty clear. The men who knew what he knew had found him. But he had been in my apartment for 4 days, and his enemies must have reckoned that he had confided in me. So I would be the next to go. It took me an hour or two to think this out. Scudder was gone,
but he had taken me into his confidence, and I was pretty well bound to carry on his work. I must vanish somehow, and keep vanished till the end of the second week in June. Then I must somehow find a way to get in touch with the government people and tell them what Scudder had told me. My first job was to keep going for the next 3 weeks. I reckoned that 2 sets of people would be looking for me: Scudder's enemies, to put me out of existence, and the police, who would want me for Scudder's murder. My notion was to get off to some wild district. I calculated that it would be less conspicuous to be a Scot and less in line with what the police might know of my past. I fixed on Galloway as the best place to go, and a search informed me that a train left St. Pancras at 7:10 the next morning. I went to bed and slept a troubled 2 hours. I got up at 4 and opened my bedroom shutters. I hunted out a well-used tweed suit and a pair of strong-nailed boots. I put my pipe in my pocket and filled my pouch from the tobacco jar on the table. As I poked into the tobacco jar, my fingers touched something hard, and I drew out Scudder's little black pocketbook, in which he was always scribbling. That seemed to me a good omen, and I put it in my pocket. I lifted the tablecloth from the body and was amazed at the peace and dignity of the dead face. "Goodbye, old chap," I said. "I'm going to do my best for you." At first, I thought there was no one in the street. Then I caught sight of a policeman 100 yards down and a loafer shuffling past on the other side. There was not a second to spare. As soon as I got to Euston Road, I took to my heels and ran. At St. Pancras, I had no time to take a ticket. A porter told me the platform as I entered it. I saw the train already in motion. 2 station officials blocked the way, but I dodged them and clambered into the last carriage. 3 minutes later, we were roaring through the northern tunnels, an irate guard interviewing me. He wrote out for me a ticket to Newton Stewart, a name which had suddenly come back into my memory, and conducted me to a third-class smoker occupied by a sailor and a lady with a child. He went off grumbling, and as I mopped my brow, I observed to my companions in my broadest Scots that it was a sore job catching trains. "The impudence of that Gerd," said the lady bitterly. The sailor morosely agreed, and I started my new life in an atmosphere of protest against authority. I had a solemn time travelling north that day. I got out Scudder's little black pocket book and studied it. It was pretty well filled with jottings, chiefly figures, though now and then a name was printed in. Now, I was certain that Scudder never did anything without a reason, and I was pretty sure that there was a cipher in all of this. I tried for hours, but none of the cipher revealed itself to me. Then I fell asleep and woke at Dumfries just in time to bundle out and get into a slow Galloway train. The only occupants of the carriage were an old shepherd and his dog, a wall-eyed brute that I mistrusted. My plan had been to get out at some quiet station down the line, but the train suddenly gave me a better chance, for it came to a standstill at the end of a rough-flowing river. I opened the door and dropped quickly into a tangle of hazels which edged the line. It would have been all right, but for that infernal dog. Under the impression that I was decamping with its master's belongings, it started to bark and all but got me by the trousers. This woke up the shepherd, who stood bawling at the carriage door in the belief that I had committed suicide. I crawled past the stream and reached the cover of a thicket, where I peered back and saw the guard and several passengers staring in my direction. I could not have made a more public departure if I had left with a bugler and a brass band. It was a gorgeous spring evening, with every hill showing as clear as cut amethyst. The air had the rooty smell of bogs, but it was as fresh as mid-ocean, and had the strangest effect on my spirits. I might have been a boy out for a spring holiday tramp instead of a man much wanted by the police. But then I saw that which set my pulses racing. Low down on the south was a monoplane climbing into the heavens. I was certain that aeroplane was looking for me and that it did not belong to the police.
started to question my choice of the countryside as a hiding place. Presently, I reached a kind of pass where a solitary house smoked in the twilight. The road swung over a bridge, and leaning on the parapet was a young man. He jumped around as my step rung on the keystone, and I saw a pleasant, sunburnt, boyish face. "Is that place an inn?" I asked. "At your service," he said politely. He gave me a room at the back of the house, and the following day I began in real earnest to study Scudder's notebook. I'd worked out it was a numerical cipher, and by an elaborate system of experiments I had pretty well discovered what were the nulls and the stops. The trouble was the keyword. And when I thought of the odd million words that he might have used, I felt pretty hopeless. But about 3 o'clock I had a sudden inspiration. The name Julia Chechenyi flashed across my memory. Scudder had said it was the key to the Karolides business, and it occurred to me to try it on his cipher. It worked. The 5 letters of Julia gave me the position of the vowels. A was J, the 10th letter of the alphabet, and so represented by Roman numeral X in the cipher. E was U, and so on. Chechenyi gave me the numerals for the principal consonants. I scribbled that scheme on a bit of paper and sat down to read Scudder's pages. In half an hour, I was reading with a whitish face. I glanced out of the window and saw a big touring car coming up the glen towards the inn. 10 minutes later, the innkeeper slipped into the room. "There's 2 chaps below looking for you," he whispered. "They're in the dining room having whiskies and sodas." My plan had been to lie hidden in my bedroom and chance my luck, but now I had a better idea. I scribbled a line of thanks to my host, opened the window, and dropped quietly into a gooseberry bush. There stood the touring car, very spick and span in the morning sunlight. I started her, jumped into the chauffeur's seat, and stole gently out onto the plateau. Almost at once the road dipped, so that I lost sight of the inn, but the wind seemed to bring me the sound of angry voices. You may picture me driving that car for all she was worth over the crisp moor road, half dazed and anxious, for I was thinking desperately of what I had found in Scudder's pocketbook. The whole story was in the notes. The story, and one strange phrase which occurred half a dozen times, inside brackets. 39 steps was the phrase. And at its last time of use it ran, 39 steps. I counted them. High tide, 10:17 p.m. I could make nothing of that. The first thing I learned was that there was no question of preventing a war. That was coming as sure as Christmas. Karolides was booked all right and was to hand in his checks on June 14th. I gathered from Scudder's notes that nothing on earth could prevent that. The second thing was that this war was going to come as a mighty surprise to Britain. And the third thing was that all this depended on a meeting which was due to happen on June 15th. A very important meeting between French and British officials was taking place, in which Britain would give France a statement on the disposition of the home fleet to mobilize in the case of war. But on that same day, there were to be others in London, others whom Scudder called the Black Stone. They represented not our allies, but our deadliest foes, a German spy organization, and the information destined for France was to be diverted to their pockets. And it was to be used a week or two later, with great guns and swift torpedoes, suddenly in the darkness of a summer night. War in Europe. It seemed impossible. Just then, I heard a noise in the sky, and lo and behold, there was that infernal aeroplane rapidly coming towards me. Down the hill I went like blue lightning. Suddenly on my left, I heard the hoot of another car. I did the only thing possible and ran slap into the hedge. The car slithered through the hedge like butter and then gave a sickening plunge forward. I leapt onto the seat and was saved by the branch of a hawthorn while a ton or two of expensive metal dropped.
with an almighty smash 50 feet to the bed of a stream. As I scrambled to my feet, a hand took me by the arm, and I found myself looking at a tall young man in goggles who kept whinnying apologies. He insisted on taking me to his house for a meal, and a few minutes later we drew up before a comfortable-looking shooting box set among pine trees. We had a hot supper and then drank grog in a big cheery smoking room with a crackling fire. He was a politician called Sir Harry, and he talked endlessly and nonsensically about Britain and Germany and how the German menace was an invention made to oppress the British people. You could see the niceness of the chap shining out from behind the muck, and I thought the time had come for me to put my cards on the table. "Listen, Sir Harry," I said, "I've something pretty important to say to you. You're a good fellow, and I'm going to be frank. Where on earth did you get all that rubbish?" His face fell. "Why, I got most of it out of the Progressive magazine. But you surely don't think Germany would ever go to war with us?" "Ask that question in 6 weeks and it won't need an answer," I said. "If you'll give me your attention for half an hour, I'm going to tell you a story." I can see yet that bright room with the deer heads on the walls. Sir Harry standing on the stone curb of the hearth and myself lying back in the armchair, speaking. It was the first time I had ever told anyone the exact truth, and it did me no end of good. "So you see," I concluded, "you have got here in your house the man that is wanted for murder. Your duty is to send for the police and give me up. I don't think I'll get very far. There'll be an accident, and I'll have a knife in my ribs in an hour or so after arrest." He watched me, and with a smile, "You're no murderer, and you're no fool, and I believe you're speaking the truth. I'm going to back you up. Now, what can I do?" "First, I've got to get in touch with the government people sometime before the 15th of June. He pulled his moustache. "I'll write to the permanent secretary at the Foreign Office. He's my godfather, and one of the best going." He sat down at the table and wrote to my dictation. The gist of it was that if a man turned up before June 15th, he was to entreat him kindly. The man would prove his bona fides by whistling Annie Laurie. "Good," said Sir Harry. "That's the proper style. You'll find my godfather, his name's Sir Walter, down at his country cottage on the Kennet. Now, what's next?" You're about my height. Lend me the oldest suit you've got. Anything will do, so long as the colour is the opposite of the clothes I'm wearing now. Then show me a map of the neighbourhood." The map gave me some notion of my whereabouts and told me the two things I wanted to know: where the main railway to the south could be joined, and what were the wildest districts near at hand. By 2 o'clock in the morning, I was pedalling diligently up steep roads of hill gravel till the skies grew pale. As the mists cleared before the sun, I found myself in a wide green world of glens falling on every side. Then I heard once again that ominous beat in the air and saw an aeroplane coming up from the east. It flew very low, and now the observer on board caught sight of me. The next thing I knew, he was speeding eastwards again till he became a speck in the blue morning. My enemies had located me. That made me do some savage thinking. If you are hemmed in on all sides in a patch of land, there's only one chance of escape. You must stay in the patch and let your enemies search it and not find you. That was good sense, but how on earth was I to escape notice in that tablecloth of a place? Then, on a tiny wisp of road beside a heap of stones, I found the roadman. He was a wild figure, about my own size, but much bent, with a week's beard on his chin and a pair of big horn spectacles. He had just arrived and was wearily flinging down his hammer. "Confound the day I ever left the herding," he said, as if to the world at large. "There I was my ain master. Now I'm a slave to the government, tethered to the roadside." I asked him what was the trouble. "The trouble is, I'm no sober," he moaned. "My doctor was married last night, and me and some others sat down to the drinking. It's easy speaking, but I got a postcard yesterday saying that the new road surveyor would be round the day." Then I had an inspiration. "Does the new surveyor know you?" I asked. "Know him? He's just been a week at the job." "Well, back to your bed," I said, "and sleep in peace. I'll take on your job for a bit and see the surveyor." He stared at me blankly. Then, as the notion dawned on his fuddled brain, his face broke into the vacant drunkard smile. "You're the bully," he cried. "It'll be easy enough managed. Take the barry and wheel enough metal fae beyond quarry down the road. My name's Alexander Turnbull, and I've been 7 year at the trade." I borrowed his spectacles and filthy old hat, stripped off my jacket and waistcoat, and gave him them to carry home. He indicated my simple tasks, and without more ado set off at an amble bedwards. I remembered an old scout in Rhodesia called Peter Pignard. He was the best scout I ever knew, and before he had turned respectable, he had been pretty often on the windy side of the law. Peter once discussed with me the question of disguises, and he had a theory which struck me at the time. He said, barring absolute certainties like fingerprints, mere physical traits were little use for identification if the fugitive really knew his business. The only thing that mattered was what Peter called atmosphere. If a man could get into perfectly different surroundings from those in which he had been first observed, and this is the important part, really play up to those surroundings and behave as if he had never been out of them, he would puzzle the cleverest detectives on earth. So, I shut off all other thoughts and made my mind dwell lovingly on sleep in a box bed. Suddenly, a crisp voice spoke from the road, and looking up, I saw a little car and a round-faced young man in a bowler hat. "Are you Alexander Turnbull?" he asked. "I'm the new county road surveyor. This is a fair bit of road, Turnbull, and not badly engineered." Clearly my get-up was good enough, for the dreaded surveyor didn't linger. I went on with my work. Just before midday, a big car stole down the hill. Its 3 occupants descended as if to stretch their legs and sauntered towards me. 2 of the men I had seen before from the window of the inn, one lean and sharp, the other comfortable and smiling. The third had the look of a countryman, a vet perhaps, or a small farmer. "Morning," said the last. "That's a fine easy job of yours." I had not looked up when they approached, and now, when accosted, I slowly and painfully straightened my back, spat vigorously, and regarded them steadily before replying. "There's were jobs and there's better," I said sententiously. "I would rather hae yours, sitting all day on your hinterlands and they cushions. It's you and your muckle cores that wreck my roads." Again the sleek one addressed me. "Did you see anyone pass early this morning? He might be on a bicycle, or he might be on foot." I very nearly fell into the trap and told a story of a bicyclist hurrying past in the grey dawn, but I had a sense to see my danger. I pretended to consider very deeply. "I wasn't up very early," I said. "You see, my doctor was married last night and we kept it up late. I opened the house door about 7 and there was nobody on the road since then." "Let us get on," he said in German. "This fellow is all right." One of them gave me a cigar, which I smelt gingerly and stuck in Turnbull's bundle. They got into their car and were out of sight in 3 minutes. My heart leaped with an enormous relief, but I went on wheeling my stones. It was as well. For 10 minutes later, the car returned, one of the occupants waving a hand to me. Those gentry left nothing to chance. I stayed in my post till 5 o'clock. By that time, I had resolved to take my chance of getting over the hills in the darkness. I spent the night on a shelf of the hillside. It was a cold business, for I had neither jacket nor waistcoat. They were in the roadman's keeping, as was Scudder's little book, my watch, and, worst of all, my pipe and tobacco pouch. I woke very cold and stiff about an hour after dawn, raised myself up in my arms and looked down into the valley, and that one look set me lacing up my boots in mad haste, for there were men below, spaced out on the hillside like a fan, and beating the heather. I put on a great spurt, and got off my ridge and down into the moor. I crossed a stream and came out on a high road which made a pass between two fields. After a few hundred yards, the grass stopped, and it became a respectable road. Clearly, it ran to a house, and I began to think of doing the same. Hitherto, my luck had held, and it might be that my best chance would be found in this remote dwelling. I stalked over the border of coarse hill gravel and entered the open veranda door. Within was a pleasant room with a knee-hole desk in the middle, and seated at it, a benevolent old gentleman. "You seem in a hurry, my friend," he said slowly, his fingers tapping lightly on his knees. I nodded towards the window. It gave a prospect across the moor and revealed certain figures straggling through the heather. "Ah, I see," he said. "A fugitive from justice, eh? Well, we'll go into it at our leisure. Meantime, I object to my privacy being broken in upon by the clumsy rural policeman. Go into my study, and you will see 2 doors facing you. Take the one on the left and close it behind you. You will be perfectly safe." And this extraordinary man took up his pen again. I did as I was bid and found myself in a little dark chamber which smelled of chemicals. The door had swung behind me with a click like the door of a safe. Once again I had found unexpected sanctuary. All the same, I was not comfortable. There was something about the old gentleman which puzzled and rather terrified me. He had been too easy and ready, almost as if he had expected me, and his eyes had been horribly intelligent. Then there was a click and the door stood open. I emerged into the sunlight to find the master of the house sitting in a deep armchair in the room he called his study, and regarding me with curious eyes. "They have gone. I convinced them that you have crossed the hill. This is a lucky morning for you, Mr. Richard Hannay." As he spoke, his eyelids seemed to tremble and to fall a little over his keen grey eyes. In a flash, the phrase of Scudder's came back to me. When he had described the man he most dreaded in the world, he had said that he could hood his eyes like a hawk. I saw that I had walked straight into the enemy's headquarters. "Carl," he spoke in German to a man in the doorway, "you will put this fellow in the storeroom, and you will be answerable to me for his keeping." I was marched out of the room with a pistol at each ear. The storeroom was as black as pitch, for the windows were heavily shuttered. I sat down in that chilly darkness in a very miserable frame of mind. I tried the shutters, but they were the kind that lock with a key, and I couldn't move them. But as I circumnavigated the room, I found the door of a wall cupboard, what they call a press in Scotland. There was a multitude of odd things there. I found a match or two in my trouser pockets and struck a light. It was out in a second, but it showed me enough.
There were a box of detonators and a lot of cord for fuses, and inside a cardboard box lay half a dozen little grey bricks. I hadn't been a mining engineer for nothing, and I knew lentonite when I saw it. After that, I sat down to think. It was a mighty risk. But against it was an absolute certainty. The remembrance of Scudder decided me. I got a detonator and fixed it to a couple of feet of fuse. Then I took a quarter of a lentonite brick and buried it in a crack in the floor. I ensconced myself just below the sill of the window and lit the fuse. There was a dead silence, only a shuffle of heavy boots in the passage. I commended my soul to my maker and wondered where I would be in 5 seconds. A great wave of heat seemed to surge upwards from the floor and hang for a blistering instant in the air. Then I think I became unconscious. But my stupor can only have lasted beyond a few seconds. I felt myself being choked by thick yellow fumes and staggered blindly away from the house. The storeroom was in ruins, and my captors were, for now, out cold on the ground. I saw on the far side of the house stood an old stone dovecot. I figured my captors would look for me on the moor, so I got to the back of the dovecot and prospected a way of ascent. That was the hardest job I had ever taken on. My shoulder and arms ached like hell, and I was so sick and giddy that I was always on the verge of falling, but I managed it somehow. All that long blistering afternoon I lay baking on the dovecot rooftop. Thirst was my chief tormentor. My tongue was like a stick, and by night time the thirst was too great to allow me to tarry. I started to descend. Halfway down I heard the back door of the house open and saw the gleam of a lantern against the mill wall. Then the light disappeared, and I dropped as softly as I could onto the hard soil of the yard. 10 minutes later, I was in a little field with my face in the spring, soaking down pints of the blessed water. My plan was to seek the roadman's cottage, recover my garments, and especially Scudder's notebook, and then make for the train station. It seemed to me the sooner I got in touch with Sir Walter, the better. I pass over the miseries of that night among the wet hills. There were no stars to steer by, and I had to do the best I could from my memory of the map. Twice I lost my way and had some nasty falls into peat bogs. The last bit was completed with set teeth and a very light and dizzy head, but I managed it. And in the early dawn it was knocking at the roadman's door. Turnbull, the roadman himself, opened it to me. And before I knew, he was helping me off with my clothes and putting me to bed in one of the 2 cupboards that lined the kitchen walls. He was a true friend in need, that old roadman. For the better part of 10 days, he did all the rough nursing I needed. Never even sought my name. On the 12th day of June, I judged myself well enough to leave Turnbull's care. A cattle truck, 2 trains, and a night at a humble inn later, I was walking in a land of lush water meadows and slow, reedy streams. I fell to whistling as I looked into the soothing green depths, and the tune which came to my lips was Annie Laurie. A fisherman came up from the waterside, and as he neared me, he too began to whistle. He nodded to me, and I thought I had never seen a shrewder or better-tempered face. "That's my house," he said, pointing to a white gate 100 yards on. "Go round to the back door." I did as I was bidden. I found a pretty cottage with a perfect jungle of lilac flanking the path. I made my way inside and sat down in a chintz-covered chair. The fisherman identified himself as Sir Walter. He believed in me, though why he did, I could not guess. I knew I looked a wild, haggard and filthy fellow. When Sir Walter appeared, having changed out of his fisherman's garbs and into a suit, the The sight of him, so respectable and secure, the embodiment of law and government, made me feel even more of an interloper. I told him the story from start to finish, and if there was ever any doubt in his mind after listening to me, it was ended when the butler entered the room. "There's been a trunk call, Sir Walter," said the butler. "Carolides has been shot dead this evening at a few minutes after 7. You would think I would have slept uneasily, but the comfortable bed and the newfound ally in Sir Walter did me no end of good. I came down to breakfast next morning after 8 hours of blessed dreamless sleep to find Sir Walter decoding a telegram in the midst of muffins and marmalade. "I had a busy hour on the telephone after you went to bed," he said. "I got my chief to speak to the First Sea Lord and the Secretary for War, and they are bringing Royer, the French official, over a day sooner. He will be in London at 5. We made our way to London in Sir Walter's car. It was a soft, breathless June morning, with a promise of sultriness later. I felt curiously at a loose end. At first it was very pleasant to be a free man, able to go where I wanted without fearing anything. But by dinner time, an abominable restlessness had taken possession of me. It seemed as if a voice kept speaking in my ear, telling me to be up and doing. The upshot was that about 9:30 I made my way to Sir Walter's London house in Queen Anne's Gate. I found myself in the foyer, supervised under the stern eye of the butler, who had informed me Sir Walter was otherwise engaged. I hadn't waited long till the butler let in another visitor. While he was taking off his coat, I saw who it was. Well, you couldn't open a magazine or a newspaper without seeing that face. The grey beard cut like a spade, the firm fighting mouth, and the keen blue eyes. The First Sea Lord, Sir Alloa. He passed my alcove and was ushered into a room at the back of the hall. Then, as time crept on to 10:30, the door of the back room opened and the First Sea Lord came out again. He walked past me, and in passing he glanced in my direction, and for a second we looked at each other in the face. Only for a second, but it was enough to make my heart jump. I had never seen the great man before, and he had never seen me, but in that fraction of time something sprang into his eyes. You can't mistake it. It's a flicker, a spark of light, a minute shade of difference which means one thing and one thing only: recognition. Not a moment could be lost, so I marched boldly to the door of the back room and entered without knocking. 5 surprised faces looked up from round the table. There was Sir Walter and 4 others who I recognized from the papers: the War Minister, the Admiralty official, General Winstanley, and a short, stout man with bushy eyebrows. Royer, the French official. Sir Walter's face showed surprise and annoyance. "This is Mr. Hannay, whom I have spoken to you," he said apologetically to the company. "I'm afraid, Hannay, this visit is ill-timed." I was getting back my coolness. "That remains to be seen, sir," I said, "but I think I may be in the nick of time. For God's sake, gentlemen, tell me who went out here a minute ago." "Lord Alloa," Sir Walter said, reddening with anger. "It was not," I cried. "It was his living image. It was not Lord Alloa. It was someone who recognized me, someone I have seen in the last month. A member of the Black Stone." Sir Walter got up and left the room while we looked blankly at the table. He came back in 10 minutes with a long face. "I have spoken to Alloa," he said. "Had him out of bed, very grumpy. He's been at home all afternoon, ill." "But it's madness," broke in General Winstanley. "Do you mean to tell me that another man came here and I didn't detect the impostor?" "Don't you see the cleverness of it?" I said. "You took Lord Alloa for granted. It was natural for him to be here, and that put you all to sleep." Then the Frenchman spoke, very slowly and in good English. "The young man is right.
His psychology is good. And another thing must be said. I talked freely when that man was here. I told him something of the military plans of my government. That information would be worth many millions to our enemies. My friends, I see no other way. The man who came here and his confederates must be taken, and taken at once. These men must not cross the sea. Royer's grave good sense seemed to pull us all together. He was the man of action among the fumblers. But I saw no hope in any face, and I felt none. Where among the 50 million of these ports, and within a dozen hours, were we to lay hands on the 3 cleverest rogues in Europe? Then, suddenly I remembered Scudder's notebook. 39 steps, I shouted. 39 steps, I counted them. High tide, 10:17 p.m. The gentleman regarded me nonplussed. Don't you see, it's a clue. Scudder knew where these fellows were going to leave the country, though he kept the name to himself. Tomorrow was the day, and it was some place where the high tide was at 10:17. Where the devil can I get a book of tide tables? A book was procured, and we scoured it. There were hundreds of entries, and so, as far as I could see, 10:17 might cover 50 places. Here's the most I can make of it, I said. We have got to find a place where there are several staircases down to the beach, one of which has 39 steps. I think it's a place of open coast with biggish cliffs, somewhere between the Wash and the Channel. Also, it's a place where full tide is at 10:17 tomorrow night. Around 1 in the morning, a man by the name of Scaife, who had been in the Navy, was summoned, and he proclaimed Bradgate, a big chalk headland in Kent, to be the most likely place, as it had villas with staircases down to a private beach. I tore open the tide tables and found Bradgate. High tide there was at 10:17 p.m. on the 15th of June. A pink and blue June morning found me at Bradgate with Scaife. We got from a house agent a key for the gates of the staircases. I walked with them along the sands and waited in a nook of the cliffs. When Scaife returned, I could tell you my heart was in my mouth. He read aloud the number of the steps of the different stairs: 42, 47, 35, 29, and 39. I almost got up and shouted. We hurried back to the town and sent a wire for 6 men. After lunch, I saw the thing I had hoped for and had dreaded to miss. A yacht came up from the south and dropped anchor pretty well opposite the house with 39 steps, which Scaife had discovered belonged to a Mr. Appleton, a retired stockbroker. Then I set to watching the house. 2 figures were having a game of tennis. One was an old man, the other was a younger fellow wearing club colours. They played with tremendous zest, like 2 city gents who wanted hard exercise to open their pores. Presently, a 3rd fellow arrived, a young man with a bag of golf clubs slung on his back. He strolled round to the tennis lawn and was welcomed riotously by the players. They all went into the house and left me feeling a precious idiot. These men might be acting, but if they were, where was their audience? They didn't know I was sitting 30 yards off in a rhododendron. It was simply impossible to believe that these hearty fellows were anything but what they seemed, 3 ordinary, game-playing suburban Englishmen. But suddenly I remembered old Peter Pina, and how only one thing mattered in the game of disguises: atmosphere. The recollection of Peter's talk gave me the first real comfort that I had had that day. Peter had been a wise old bird, and these fellows I were after were about the pick of the aviary. What if they were playing Peter's game? Scaife's men would be in place by now, but there was no sign of a soul. The house stood as open as a marketplace for anybody to observe. Feeling the greatest fool on earth, I opened the gate and rang the bell. The old man's manner was perfect. "Did you wish to see me?" he said, hesitatingly. Though I hadn't an ounce of confidence in me, I forced myself to play the game. "I think we've met before," I said, "and I guess you know my business." Maybe, said the old man. I haven't a very good memory. By now the other two had gathered around him, curiously, while I made nothing of it. One was bald and old, one was stout, one was dark and thin. There was nothing in appearance to prevent them being the three who had hunted me in Scotland, but there was nothing to identify them. Well then, I said, and all the time I seemed to be talking pure foolishness to myself, I have come to tell you that the game's up. I have a warrant for the arrest of you three gentlemen. Arrest? Said the old man, and he looked really shocked. Arrest? Good God, what for? For the murder of Franklin Scudder in London on the 23rd day of last month. After that, for a minute, there was utter silence. The old man was staring at me, the very model of innocent bewilderment. "Do you propose to march us off to the police station?" asked the plump one. "I have the right to ask to see your warrant, but I don't wish to cast aspersions upon you. We are only doing your duty. But you'll admit it's horribly awkward. Meantime, I vote we have a game of bridge. We've been wanting a fourth player. Do you play, sir?" I accepted, as if it had been an ordinary invitation at the club. The whole business had mesmerized me. We went into the smoking room where a card table was set out. I took my place at the table in a kind of dream. The window was open, and the moon was flooding the cliffs and sea with a great tide of yellow light. Then something awoke me. The old man laid down his hand to light a cigar. He didn't pick it up at once, but sat back for a moment in his chair with his fingers tapping on his knees. It was the movement I remembered when I had stood before him in the moorland farm with the pistols of the servants behind me. A little thing, lasting only a second, and the odds were 1,000 to 1 that I might have had my eyes on my cards at the time and missed it, but I didn't, and in a flash the air seemed to clear. Some shadow lifted from my brain, and the three faces seemed to change before my eyes and reveal their secrets. The young one was the murderer. His knife, I felt certain, had skewered Scudder to the floor. His kind had put the bullet in Karolides. The plump man's features seemed to form again as I looked at them. He hadn't a face, only 100 masks that he could assume when he pleased. But the old man was the pick of the lot. He was sheer brain, icy, cool, calculating, as ruthless as a steam hammer. And now that my eyes were opened, I wondered where I had seen the benevolence. I blew my whistle, and in an instant the lights were out. "Schnell, Franz!" cried a voice. "Das Boot! Das Boot!" As it spoke, I saw two of Scaife's fellows emerge on the moonlit lawn. The young, dark man leapt for the window and was through it and over the low fence before a hand could touch him. I grappled the old chap, and the room seemed to fill with figures. Suddenly my prisoner broke from me and flung himself on the wall. There was a click as if a lever had been pulled. Then came a low rumbling far, far below the ground, and through the window I saw a cloud of chalk dust pouring out of the shaft of the stairway. Someone switched on the light. The old man was looking at me with blazing eyes. "He is safe," he cried. "You cannot follow in time. He is gone. The Black Stone will triumph. Der schwarze Stein ist in der Siegeskron." There were more in those eyes than any common triumph. They had been hooded like the bird of a prey, and now they flamed with a hawk's pride. A white, fanatic heat burned in them, and I realized for the first time the terrible thing that I had been up against. This man was more than a spy. In his foul way, he had been a patriot. As the handcuffs clinked on his wrists, I said my last words to him. "I hope France will bear his triumph well. I ought to tell you that your yacht, for the last hour, has been in our hands." "7 weeks later, as all the world knows, we went to war. I joined the army in the first week, and owing to my experience, got a captain's commission straight off. But I had done my best service, I think, before I put on khaki.